Hello and welcome to our analysis of iCAT11, part of our All India National Level CAT test series for CAT18. So once you reach iCAT11, which means from iCAT 25 to 12, you've covered nearly 60% of the mock so far. And by now, you would have had a good handle on how to attempt each section, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and what your optimal attempt strategy should be. So before we go into iCAT11, which we'll analyze in three parts, one for each section, let's have a look at the first part, that's verbal ability. Before looking at verbal ability, let's first look at the overall difficulty of this mock, which has been rated as a moderate mock by our experts. So what does this number 1.83 next to moderate imply? As we've explained in all the analysis so far, each question in the mock is given an LOD or a difficulty level from 1 to 3, where 1 corresponds to easy and 3 is tough. So 1.83 is the average difficulty level of each question in this mock. A pure 2 would be purely moderate, so it's slightly below that. Now, does this mean that each question is slightly below moderate? No, there'll be easy as well as tough questions. This is the average value. Let's compare the verbal ability section first with this difficulty. As we can see, verbal ability is below this average value. On the whole, on an absolute term, it can be classified as an easy to moderate section. Now, why do we say that? As we can see, the average difficulty of VA is less than that of the overall section. But when I compare it with the difficulty level in the actual mock, I can say that in the actual mock this value is somewhere around 1.9, closer to moderate. So if you can say that this section was around 20% easier compared to the actual mock as far as the actual CAT was concerned. So how many questions should you attempt? How should you attempt? Before that, we need to look at the structure of the verbal ability section. Typically, it has two parts, RCs and non-RCs or para-summaries and theta questions. So there are 24 RCs and 10 other questions. So when we go into RCs, the most common structure is 3 sets of 6 questions plus 2 sets of 3 questions. Of course, there can be other structures possible, but this is the most commonly seen structure in the CAT as well in the other mocks. Now, we generally tell students that you need to try and attempt anywhere close to 3 to 3.5 sets on an average. Now, this might mean that the number of questions that you attempt has to be somewhere around 12 to 15. This could even come from 4 sets. So, keep that in mind when you attempt. Now, how do we analyze the RC part? One way to analyze RCs where people generally look at is the subject matter area. What is the question on or what is the topic on? But that is incomplete. Ideally, you should be looking at a combination of 3 or 4 factors. One, as we said, the subject matter, which is given here. 2 is the number of questions, which can be 3 or 6. As shown here. 3 is the word length, so how short or long is the passage. And 4 is the average difficulty of the questions. Now the average difficulty of the questions can generally be identified only after the passage is read or only after the mock. But the other 3 are visible right at that stage. So you need to keep an eye on all of these and then decide whether you should have done the passage or not. When we look at this particular mock, there are some very clear trends coming up. One, unlike the earlier mocks where both the 3 question passages were first and then there were all the 6 question passages, here we had a break where we had 3, 6, 3 and then 6, 6. Also, there were 3 passages which were very short. 475 is typically the average word length for RCs and CAT. At the same time, it was compensated by 2 passages which were extremely long. And when I consider this last one, the longest one on biometrics, This is actually something similar to IFT and not really CAT. But this is more as a variety to try and trap you into reading this, because it's on a topic that a lot of students find easier to read compared to say political science or India's economic status. People might find it easier to read something on biometrics. So if you look at all 5 topics, this is more of a trap RC. Now why do I say it's a trap RC? Look at these other topics. Paradox in poetry. So people find poetry and they might think that, oh, this is something tough, especially when they see that it is so short. So they might think that this is a short RC with complicated matter. Let's ignore for the time being. Political science, again a lot of sociology, political science, etc. India's economic status, again similar topic. So people might be tempted to leave that and go on to something which appears more scientific and fact based in nature. But when I look at this, this is an extremely long RC, so we'll take a lot of time in reading this. Secondly, if I look at the questions, these tend towards 2. Definitely tougher than the overall average LOD. So this is an RC which I would definitely not attempt in the exam, even though it has 6 questions, because of this factor primarily and this factor. On the other hand, you observe that the 3 shortest RCs also have the simplest questions. So it might so happen that these topics do not seem enticing enough. These topics seem complicated, but this is definitely something that could have been attempted. Whereas the passage on European law was something which was again longish, 700 words, and it had the toughest question in this entire section. So again, even though it had 6 questions, this would not be a high priority area for me in this mock. So my strategy for this mock really would be to try out both the 3 question passages and one of the 6 question passages, and try and increase my accuracy rather than the attempts. So as I'll show you some time later, the overall, even though this was slightly easier, the overall attempts in this particular section would be lower, because the focus would be on accuracy and trying to get a good score from that. So here I would say that 3 passages would be a reasonably good performance, and out of these 6, 3 and 3, 15 questions, anywhere close to 13 to 14 questions would be a reasonably good attempt, looking at the other 2 RCs which were both 6 question RCs. Let's look at the non-RC and numerical entry questions now. As you can see here, the standard format was followed, which is 4 questions on jumbled sentences, 3 on contextual odd man out questions, and 3 on para summary. Contextual odd man questions, as you all know by now, are questions where you have 4 or 5 statements in a passage. You need to arrange them in a sequence, and one of those sentences does not fit. So it's an application of jumbled sentences, but because you need to find the odd man out, these are significantly tougher. In this particular mock, we observed the converse, whereby these were simpler compared to the jumbled sentences. The para summaries as usual were moderate. So here you can see, while no particular area was moderate to tough or tough, they were either easy or moderate. So here, out of these 10 questions, if somebody were to ask me what would be my ideal number of attempts, I would say for the non-RC questions, I would put my attempts as close to somewhere around 4 to 5. Now what do I mean by 4 to 5 here? We typically recommend that students should attempt all 10 questions or at least all the theta questions. But here when we say serious attempts, these are the ones where you are fairly confident of getting the right answer. So when I compare these two, I would say anywhere close to 13 attempts in the RCs and 4 attempts in the non-RCs would be a reasonably good performance. On the whole, anywhere close to 17 attempts would be fairly good. Now before we go into any one of the passages, let's just have a look at the third graph of this analysis, which we'll see in each section. Now what does this graph tell me? Essentially, these are the MCQ versus non-MCQ questions in the mock, where the blue bars correspond to MCQs, and this is the average difficulty level of each question in the mock. Now, why is this important? Its actual importance will get seen really in quant. But here again, you can actually select certain RCs and identify the ones where the average LOD was the same, but they were still tough to solve. For instance, here, when I look at the one on India's economic status, observe that all its questions were on the easier side. Similarly, the RC on political science had only easy to moderate questions. The same was the case with paradox in poetry. So these three were the RCs which really had only easy to moderate questions. On the other hand, if I look at the one on European law, three tough, two tough, two moderate, two easy. So when you average this out, it appears moderate. But when I look at 4 out of 6 questions being tough to moderate, this is something that I would definitely have wanted to skip, especially because it is 700 words. Similarly, the one on biometrics, 5 moderate questions, 1 easy question. Not even a single tough question. So it looks doable in that sense. But when I combine this with the fact that there are 1000 words here, again something which puts me off from attempting this. So these are the ones that I would try, whereas these are the ones that I would skip. Among the numerical entry questions, observe that you can, if you are able to identify the easier questions here, you directly get your 2 to 3 attempts easily. So it does not matter if you do not do all the questions. You have to try and search for the easier questions and make that into a habit. This does not happen overnight. It is not an easy process. It comes with a lot of practice. On the whole, as we said, 16-17 attempts, fairly decent. Let's have a look at potentially one RC. Let's say the one on political science and see how it could have been solved. So this is the one on political science which starts here, which says since political science is especially something something. Now here observe that there is no separation into paragraphs. So this partially increases the difficulty in reading. But it's because it's a short passage, it can be read quickly. Now here, as we've said all along, RC questions can be classified as factual, inferential or semi-factual. If you see the very first question, it says the passage supports which of the following inferences. Now here, inference is something which is not directly mentioned in the passage. You need to take the data given in the passage and interpret it to arrive at some kind of inference or some kind of deduction. So this is an inferential question and hence it's been classified as an LOD2. Whereas when I look at the next question, and I won't really go into the exact solving, but the question says, what does the writer mean by behavioral revolution? So you first need to go and search that passage or that part of the passage and you find this data here. Now, if you just look at that sentence, the trend has continued and accelerated even as the behavioralist revolution has subsided. Now, this does not give me too much data, so I need to go backwards and read the whole thing again. When I read it, if I read the line just below that, the late 1960s and early 1970s witnessed a takeoff in the use of deductive game theoretical format of formal modeling techniques aimed at generating a more analytical corpus of knowledge in the discipline. Does this answer my question? Does this give me enough data to answer here? The various political revolutions in history. This doesn't really seem to be the right answer because it does not discuss politics. The systematic and rigorous study of individual and group behavior and a close relation with other social sciences including sociology and psychology. So are these two things mentioned in the passage here? If I look at this passage, here we've all been saying that politics can be studied as an activity, as the work of government in a conflict, etc. In the 1915-60s, a behavioral revolution stressing the systematic and rigorously scientific study of individual and group behavior swept the discipline. and the late 1960s and 70s witnessed a takeoff of formal modeling techniques aimed at generating a more analytical corpus. So, what the passage tells me is that there has been a lot of systematic study of group behavior, individual behavior, and this has been done in a very rigorous analytical format. If I look at this, the passage says that game theoretical modeling techniques has actually increased, whereas the behavioralist revolution has subsided. Hence, I would not say that 2 is the answer. 3 seems to be most logical answer here. Similarly, you can eliminate options in each of the passages and try and attempt them. This particular mock, even though the LOD seems to be easier, the attempts have gone down because of the subject matter of the passages. On the whole, as we've said, this was an easy to moderate section tending more towards moderate. The number of good attempts for this particular section would tend towards 16 or 17. Your selection of passages was extremely important. In parts 2 and 3 of our analysis, we will have a look at the DILR and quant sections respectively. You can view the analysis for all the videos for all our previous analysis on our official YouTube channel. You can subscribe for the same by clicking on the link given here. Hit the bell button to receive notifications every time a new video is released. You can also post your comments, feedbacks or questions on the thread below the video. Keep watching, wish you all the very best and thank you.